Welcome back. For those of you who believe that it is too soon to start talking about what we need to do, we are. And we'll start by noting who isn't, like our local members of Congress. We reached out to Congressman Vern Buchanan to ask what he is prepared to do in the aftermath of the massacre of 17 people at a high school in his state, but we never heard back. We reached out to Congressman Tom Rooney as well, but we were told he was not available. We reached out to Senator Marco Rubio, and we never heard back. And we contacted Senator Bill Nelson, who talked on the Senate floor and to the television networks, but not to us. But joining us is Sarasota's newest state representative, Margaret Good, who was elected just this week, sworn into office yesterday, and is traveling back from Tallahassee as we speak. Representative Good, thank you for joining us. And let me ask you this, because we've heard Governor Scott say today that next week he is going to talk to legislative leaders about doing something in terms of mental health and school safety, and he's not taking anything off the table. Specifically, what would you like the legislature to consider?
Alan, this is such an important issue, and my heart aches about this news, but we need to actually take some action. I believe that we need to give schools the funds that they need to stay safe, and in my mind, that includes having enough public funds to build infrastructure to, for instance, have a single entrance in the school. So it's much harder, much more difficult for people to go into the school. I also think we need to make sure that we have adequate funds for SROs, for safety officers in schools, and that we are working on safe school design, which costs money. We need to make sure that our public schools have adequate funding to keep our children safe. But I think that there is, that's just one part of the issue, and we really need to talk about some sensible gun
Right,
control.
Margaret, let me ask you this while we have time. Is it time for the state to talk about semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 that was used in Parkland, and also the size of magazines that are sold to consumers in Florida? Is it time for the state to do something about that?
3 of the 10 most deadly mass shootings occurred in the last 5 months. I think it's time that we start really talking about what's going to make a difference, what kind of gun regulation, gun laws we can enact that will make a difference. And I think that we need to make sure that we are not selling guns to violent criminals, to known or suspected terrorists. We need universal background checks. When it comes to public schools, we need to make sure that we have wraparound services so that there's mental health counseling in schools if necessary. And then, of course, closing the gun show loophole, I think, would also help to prevent some of this violence.
Okay, State Representative Margaret Good, thank you very much for joining us today. We are just getting warmed up on this broadcast, and we'll have much more after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. It's happened again, another school massacre, this time in Florida, and many of us are looking for answers. And joining us for more are Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota Board of Education, Deputy School Superintendent Scott Lempe, Ron Chapman, an attorney with the NRA, and Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College. And joining us by Skype from the National Conference on Education in Nashville is Kurt Lavarello, Executive Director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, who, by the way, is a former police officer in Broward County. Thank you all for joining us, and let's start our conversation by listening to a student at Parkland who said this today earlier on CNN.
What we really need is action, because we can say, yes, we're going to do all these things, thoughts and prayers. What we need more than that is action. Please, this is the 18th one this year. That's unacceptable. We're children. You guys are the adults. You need to take some action and play a role. Work together, come over your politics, and get something done.
He's talking to us. Mm-hmm. He's talking to each one of us who is elected to office or an expert on politics or the media. And the question is, Governor Scott said that he's going to go back to Tallahassee next week, talk to legislative leaders about doing something, whether it's involved with mental health or school safety, and he's not taking off the table things doing about the availability of guns or magazines. Bridget, let me start with you. You know, some people are saying, let's have this conversation about weapons and magazines and the availability where a kid who is 18, 19 years old, like we saw yesterday, can buy this sort of thing.
Well, I think first and foremost, I think we need to remember why we're here and how tragic it is. And we're talking about lives that were lost and families' lives that are completely changed forever. So it's easy to go into the partisan politics very quickly. And I want to applaud Governor Scott for quickly saying nothing's off the table. I think all of us around this table and around this community and country are ready to seriously figure out what we can do. And it's a multifaceted approach. It's going to come down to school infrastructure locally, and it's going to be down to mental health discussions. But I really think I want to possess extreme caution that we don't go, it gets so political so quickly, and we're talking about human lives. So I want to make sure we're cautious about that.
Let's go out to Kurt Lavarello, who is at, we said, this National Education Association convention in Nashville. But interesting, Kurt, you told me earlier that only 2 sessions involving this entire conference where you have all these educators and superintendents around the country is dedicated to school safety.
Yes, absolutely, Alan. We have probably over 75 sessions here, and I noted that only 2 were focused on school safety related issues. So one of the things I have said all along is we truly have to change the mindset of the education community. I mean, you know, it sounds great to sit back and say we're going to make school security a priority. It's another thing to actually demonstrate that. And I disagree with Bridget Ziegler because I know we've had this about the partisan politics in the past where we've said, now's the time to grieve. You know, and quite honestly, we've heard that before with the Pulse nightclub shooting, the Vegas shooting, all these other shootings we've seen. We've put on the back burner, and you know what? We're such a resilient nation. We bounce back from these tragedies very quickly, and they get shoved to the side. Yesterday, one of the more trending issues was this shooting on Twitter. Today, it's Jennifer Aniston's breakup. So these things get lost in the shuffle, and that student was absolutely right.
Frank, why is the politics so vexing to us that, look, you have a lot of people in both sides of the political aisle who say something has to be done, not, you know, what exactly, but something has to be done. Right. And it's not strictly partisan because you have both Republicans and Democrats who are not for any kind of real discussion or movement on the issue of what we call gun control. So
it's highly polarized, and I think everybody is shocked and horrified, and they don't like seeing these things happen, but it's interpreted very differently depending upon where you are on the issue. And so certainly you see a crescendo on the gun control advocacy side, we have to do something now. But on the other side, for Second Amendment supporters, sometimes these incidents, their reaction is we need to relax gun control issues. Where I think we might actually see some movement politically gets back to, I think, a really huge mistake, something called the Dickey Amendment in 1996, which prohibits funding for the CDC to be used towards researching gun violence. And that is something that right to today we saw the President's Health and Human HHS Secretary Azar actually said that he might move on that.
Well, let me ask you all of this, because the one thing that the President mentioned today and the Governor mentioned last night and today was doing something about the relationship between mental illness and guns. You know, the President signed a bill when he first came into office that did away with an Obama-era law or rule that required the Social Security Administration to report those people who have been treated for mental health issues to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. You know, you work with the NRA. Why, given what we are experiencing, did the President sign that law, and would the NRA be supportive of reversing course?
No, they wouldn't be supportive, and the ACLU supported that particular legislation as well, with him, eliminating that type of restriction. And that restriction wouldn't have prevented this particular injury today or this particular massacre that occurred yesterday. It's a mental health issue, but it's not a mental health issue that we create some blanket rules that go to all of the fringes. We want to look at people that are purchasing firearms, look at their mental health, and we do. There are statutes on place. This person did not have a bona fide mental health issue that was recognized, that was treated, that was documented, that prevented him from getting a firearm.
I want to get to two issues in our remaining time. One was this excruciating statement from the mother of a young girl who lost her life today. Let's take a look at that.
The gunman, a crazy person, just walks right into the school, knocks down the window of my child's door, and starts shooting her, and killing her. President Trump, you say, what can you do? You can stop the guns from getting into these children's hands. Put metal detectors at every entrance to the schools. What can you do? You can do a lot.
We could debate this all we want, but Bridget, I mean, obviously, that woman is in pain. We have to acknowledge that. But you know, she is saying that at this point, we got to get away from just our preconceived notions of what
absolutely.
to do.
I would say that all day long, and I've heard from many people in the community. I myself, I mean, I even get choked up thinking about it. So as a mom and as a school board member who's there to represent the community, I take this very seriously. Safety and security has always been a priority. It's always an ongoing thing. What I want to make sure is that there was an element that she mentioned as far as metal detectors, and I think Scott Lemke was previously mentioned that. So this is a conversation we need to have. We need to have quickly. We also need to take certain protective measures when it relates to perimeter, single member access, and those are the things that are going on right now. But we need to fast track.
Let me ask you about one other thing that I believe that you have spoken to about before, and that's arming school teachers.
Absolutely. Oh no, I didn't say that. No, sorry.
Okay, well, I mean, that has been something that has been discussed, whether or not teachers should be able to get trained and be armed in the classroom. What is your position on that?
I'm personally I want us to go the route of the SROs. I've said that very publicly. I want us to work towards that. Right now we have an SRO in every middle school and high school. I've been a huge advocate of putting them in elementary schools. Law enforcement, we're very fortunate to have great relationships with our local law enforcement. I know the sheriff has brought forward some solutions because costs are expensive when you talk about SROs, so bringing in retired law enforcement officers that are in the area that would hopefully help us there. So that's an avenue I'd like to go and
Scott, if you could address that, and also what some people do suggest, arm the teachers.
So I'll speak for myself as a school board employee, not for the school board itself, but it's a ridiculous idea. Bringing more guns, and my background is military, so I speak with some credibility here. Bringing more guns to a gunfight has never been the right answer. I absolutely believe, as Bridget said, that the right thing to do is leave that business to sworn law enforcement officers. And I think there are some creative ways you can get there and make it work within the budget, but arming teachers is not the answer.
Well, one of the difficulties with that, every time we leave it to sworn officers, by the time this type of tragedy breaks out, they're always late to the game. They show up after the shootings have taken place. We have to train the people that are in the institution how to protect themselves, how to recognize, how to run, how to hide, how to get out of harm's way, and we do it all wrong right now.
And Kurt, let me ask you this, because this is one of those issues that you are most concerned about.
Yeah, I was. And one of the things Ron mentioned, you know, we have seen the elimination of funds in the state of Florida that have cut school resource officers. I can remember a time when I moved to Sarasota County, we had 40 some odd school resource officers working in not only every middle and high school, but elementary schools as well. We had intervention officers that would actually go out and meet with these issues that were going on in the community and bring this to the forefront. And a lot of those positions were cut within the last 8-9 years. So we've seen these cuts. So in one way, Ron's right in saying that, but the funding, the state can't tell me we can't fund officers in our schools. That is absolutely ridiculous. Let me give me have one day with that budget. I'll show you where we
just going back to my earlier point. We are a sophisticated country, and we have the capacity to look at data at what might work and what might not work. We've been blocked as a nation for the last 20 years from even having our federal authorities, the CDC, to look at gun violence, and maybe that'll lift. But we've got to do that.
We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. We have heard from the president, the governor, talking about keeping guns away from the mentally ill. And joining us for more is clinical psychologist specialist Eddie Renier. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. How do you do that? I mean, I would imagine that only a fraction of the number of people who have real mental health issues that they should not be able to access guns are actually adjudicated by a court of law and therefore legally would be denied access to weapons.
You know, my feeling of this is that the mentally ill are blamed falsely for violence in this country. In fact, they constitute a very small minority, 5% of the violent acts in this country, the perpetrators of the Violence Act. Most of the violence, 95% or more of the violence committed in this country are not by the mentally ill, but the mentally ill get blamed for it.
Well, let me ask you this, because an act like this, or an act of a mass-scale murder situation, isn't that in itself an act of mental illness?
Well, you would think so, but most acts of violence in this country are caused by people with an intention for crime, vendetta, because they're angry, because they're on drugs or alcohol, or all of the above. They're angry, they are on drugs, or they've been drinking, and there's an argument, and someone gets killed. The other issue that we like to avoid is the ease access to guns. Wherever there's a lot of guns, there's also a lot of violence. And so guns, violence, alcohol, and people lead to violence.
In terms of this young man who was responsible for this massacre, how many people we saw in the last 24 hours that said if you ever wanted to see this coming, it was this young man? There were so many warning signs on social media, what he would say to other kids and other adults. Where did the system break down here?
You know, one of the things we're not good at is identifying people who are at risk, people who are in trouble. And we really should have more public education about how to identify someone who's in trouble, whether it's from mental health or because it's a family breakup, divorce, or someone's preoccupied with extreme beliefs. We need to know how to identify who is at risk of doing something violent from those who are not. And no one talks about that. But this young man seemed to have left a barn door of evidence that something was wrong, and everyone ignored it. And that's tragic.
I mean, he was removed from that school. He was went into a special school there, but in the end, because he was of age, he was able to buy a firearm like this. I mean, is that possibly the area where people on both sides of this issue could agree that we have to prevent it in some way?
Absolutely. We need to register guns. We need to have safe keeping of guns. Young people should not have access to them as easily as we have them today, whether they have mental illness or not. It's the ease and access of guns, and plus human beings who have trouble. And if, at least one thing we can do is identify those who are in trouble and get them the help that they need. Easier access to mental health services without stigma is what we need to move to.
But this is a kid who was between homes. His parents, adoptive parents, died. Is it just a situation that the whole system failed?
Yeah. In this case, a plethora of evidence that suggests that this person was at risk and no one acted on it.
Doctor, thank you so much. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Bridget Ziegler, the chair of the Sarasota Board of Education, Deputy School Superintendent Scott Lempe, Ron Chapman, an attorney with the NRA, Frank Alcock, a political science professor at New College, Kurt Lavarello, executive director of the School Safety Advocacy Council, and Dr. Eddie Renier.